The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this January 27th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening on First Amendment Radio from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's Pacific time, or you can listen to the show at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And if not, go to my website at www.arcticbeacon.com. Well, I was really debating whether to do a show today because I'd spent the whole evening trying to get my website back up and running. Now, these computer issues can really blow your mind. And let me tell you, yesterday somebody called me and said, "Greg, I can't get on your site. There's a whole bunch of there's a row of numbers and it says cache error, etc., etc." So I immediately think, oh boy, did somebody crack into this thing, which isn't uncommon. It's happened a couple times. But I always do a couple backups, so it's no problem. So I then called my hosting company and it started a fiasco that didn't end till this morning. And everything goes through your mind. 10 years of work down the drain. And I said, well, who cares? You know, radio's just goes in one ear and out the other. People know what I've said. And I've got all these YouTubes that people make of what I do anyway. So who cares? But of course, you want to keep your work for posterity, so to speak. I very rarely go back, although I'm going to do that today. Go back to 2007, and I'll tell you why in just a second. And then I started thinking, well, who would want to do this? Who would want to get this website off? And then I said, well, you know, you're going to think, well, somebody hacked into it. That's in the second thought. So you go through that. Then you go, well, no, it's just probably some stupid error that's done with all these codes and everything. And basically, that's what it turned out to be. So the website's up and running again. And that's how I spent my evening. Isn't the computers fun? Aren't they really? Your whole life is on a little in this cyberspace, in this area. I wish we just had paper, you know, and I could write down and talk to you on the phone, or do it the old way they did radio. Sometimes, you know, it gets so complicated that you spend your whole life trying to figure out some stupid code that I don't know what means. And half the people that I talk to don't either. And there's these guys that understand it. And it's a whole different language. Well, that's enough on that. So that's why I wasn't going to do a show, because I was so preoccupied. Didn't get much sleep. But I figured what has interested me over the years was the connection, when I lived in Rome, the connection between the Vatican, of course, and the CIA, and, of course, the governments around the world. We spend a lot of time talking about that. But what interests me very much is the Vatican's complicity with the Mafia and how they operate, in the Italian Mafia, the Sicilian Mafia, the Naples Mafia. And many of you don't know, there's different factions in Italy. The Naples mob was called the Camorra. Then we, of course, had the Sicilian mob. Then we have the Calabrian. There were a number of different groups, and probably Cosa Nostra, the most powerful. Okay, there's always this pecking order. And when you start transferring all this to the United States, you see the pecking order play out very well. And you know, you've all remember The Sopranos. That was a show that was done based, not loosely, but very closely based on the New Jersey mob. And the Vito Cantadante, or whatever their name was, family. But they were always considered like the stepchild to all the New York mobs. And so I figured one of these days I want to get a chance to talk to one of these guys in the largest crime family, and that was the Gambino crime family. that John Gotti, of course, the Teflon Don, put out there on Time magazine, and boy, was that an interesting story. If you really, America's fascination and the world's fascination with the Italian Mafia and the Sicilian mob and the Cosa Nostra is unprecedented. People watch these movies. Remember The Godfather? Well, The Godfather 3 loosely talked about the Vatican's connection with the mob. But let me tell you this. When you want to go, I watched a movie the other day called Gotti. I saw it years ago, and it's with Anthony Quinn and Armand Asante, who plays, he's a great actor, plays Gotti, and it's worth watching because it's not a documentary, but pretty close. Then what you got to do is watch the documentary of Sammy Gravano, who was the underboss under Gotti. Watch those two shows, and you're going to see that crime pays. You're going to see these guys make millions, and they can't do it without complicity of the government, the cops, and the Vatican. And I learned this when I interviewed in 2007, September 26th, Tony Gambino of the infamous Gambino New York crime family. And he talked about the Vatican-U.S. government connection. Now, he was the grandson of Lucky Luciano, and he came on my show, and at that time I invited Eric Phelps to come on and interview him as well, so you'll hear Eric's voice. Now, he talked openly for an hour, indicting indicting top Vatican and U.S. government officials with complicity in high crimes, treason, and assassinations as they work together. Now, when you go to that Sammy Gravano interview of the Gambino family, okay, and he was the underboss of Gotti, who took over by whacking Paul Castellano, you're going to see that Gravano, he admitted to over 19 murders and was given, I think, about an 18-month sentence because he ratted on 30 or 40 mob members, including Gotti, putting him in jail. And then Sammy got out, after 18 months, and had all his millions. And I'm not sure exactly what happened to him. I heard he got arrested in Las Vegas for some type of bookmaking. Something, I don't know where he's at now. But he probably still, if alive, is still in the witness protection program. But this fascination with the mob, when you say crime pays, it does. Now, in this case, we're going to listen to this Gambino interview that I did in 2007, but let me preface it with some of my personal stories, and they're not many with the mob. But living in Italy, first of all, let's go back to Chicago where I grew up. Now, the mob's alive and well there. It was alive and well in the 50s and 60s. And my dad at the time was a businessman, and he started out with owned a milk company. And in the basement, he had kind of like a place where all the politicians would come. I remember at the time, the St. Louis Cardinal football team was in Chicago. They were called the Chicago Cardinals. They moved to St. Louis. Now, of course, they're in Arizona and lost last week miserably to the Carolina Panthers. But that's another story. But he used to have a little place down in the basement. He set it up with a pool table. They used to play cards, a little gambling place, basically. And all the politicians and business guys, and I'm sure some of the connected guys used to come there. And I remember one night they threw a party on my birthday. I think it was I was a young kid. And the whole St. Louis the Chicago Cardinal football team came, and I had pictures of them passing me down the steps into the basement where all these guys did their gambling and everything. Remember Dan Rostenkowski? He used to come, and so the politicians were connected. So the first question is, was my dad connected to the mob? No. First of all, he's Polish descent, and in a sense, I think my dad got pretty much of a free hand. He wasn't asked for protection money or anything, basically because he used to deliver milk to all these guys. And at least that's my assumption. And he was pretty close to some of these politicians, and so my dad stayed pretty much away from it. So that was probably my first understanding of what this was. Then when I grew up and was living in Chicago and getting jobs, one of my best friends was Italian, and his uncle was a state representative, and he also was in the He was also in the Board of Tax Appeals. He double dipped. And he was basically an Italian family. And what basically back then when Mayor Daley was in office, we would get jobs. I mean, we could have any job we really wanted. I mean, so when I came back from college, he asked me, Ralph asked me, what do you want to do? And he said, look, I can get you a job as a chauffeur while you're going to school. And I was spending a year in law school then. And you can drive Harry to work and basically put you on the books as an office worker or something. So that's kind of how it operated. Now, I know Harry had dealings because I used to drive him around, and there were many big wigs that used to, including Muhammad Ali, that used to be in his car talking tax deals, whatever. I didn't listen much, didn't want to know. So that probably was my second kind of brush with how the mob works. I mean, very businesslike, working together with politicians. And it was interesting that a lot of Harry's meetings sometimes were at little churches and things. We'd go and stop at a Catholic church here and there. So it was all secondhand. But anyway, you know the mob's still alive and well in all these cities. But anyway, what Gotti once said, when Gotti was put away, he was kind of one of those old-time mobsters. He was put in with life without parole. I don't even know if he's still alive. But he did say this. He said that 10, 20 years from now, the people of America are going to wish they had the Cosa Nostra only. They're going to wish they had us, not what they got now. They got lawlessness. They got the Russian mob. They got the Chinese. You got every mob under the sun. The global mob, he called it. It's going to rip this country wide open. They have no respect for this country, such and such and such. So is that the way to think about it? The lesser of two evils? But anyway, I'm just reciting what Gotti said. Now, when I went to Rome, my first touch with the mob was basically through a guy I met living in this small town in Rome, who I found out, who was a really nice guy. He used to buy me dinner all the time, was fascinated with America, drove big cars. Everybody said he was a land investor. He was a young guy. I mean, better looking than Robert De Niro and Al Pacino combined. Nice family in a villa, kids, the whole works. And I'd ask who he is, and I swear, I knew him for 2 years. I don't think I ever paid for a meal. He was one of those guys that just opened his pocketbook, especially if he wanted to talk about America. And so we became kind of friends. I used to see him in the morning, have coffee before I went off to Rome. And his last name was Cuomo. Okay? Now, I don't know if he's any relation. He was a typical Italian. But I remember his name was Cuomo. And one day I'm in Rome, and I've known this guy for 2 years, just in passing. No, none of the business, anything like that. You got to understand, that's a tight-knit organization. They don't just tell their business to you. But I thought he was a land investor. So guess what happens? I'm reading the paper in Rome. I don't know, it was Corriere della Sera or the La Repubblica. And there he is, splashed all over the front page. Typical mob hit. He was killed while getting his hair cut in a barbershop in Naples, and he turned out to be one of the right-hand men of the Camorra mob boss. At that time, there was a big, huge bloodbath going on, and this was very serious. They were not only killing mob members but they were trying to wipe out these two factions of the mob. Were trying to wipe out any kind of bloodline, so they were going after the whole families. So I remember back in this little town I lived in, these people just disappeared overnight. The family was gone, the villa was empty, and that was my first real touch with the mob from afar. Now, as I spent doing stories regarding the Vatican bank scandal with Father, Archbishop Marcinkus from Chicago, who I imagine had very good mob connections in Chicago, was the head of the Vatican Bank. Now that's a scenario, that's one that's going to really lead to a lot of corruption. You got it all working there. You got a guy from Chicago who was a Masonic Lodge member. His nickname was Gorilla in the P2 Lodge. He didn't know anything about banking. There are no controls on the Vatican Bank. He had ties to the Chicago, New York, and whatever else mob you want to talk about. And also the Sicilian mob and the Camorra and all of these mobsters in Rome, in Italy, as well as bankers, as well as the government. And this is just a recipe for corruption. And we saw it explode during the 80s in the Vatican Bank scandal. At that time, the largest scandal this bank had ever been under. And there were people killed. For example, the big one was Roberto Calvi, the head of the Bank of Ambrosiano, who was probably going to spill the beans, and they found him hanging under the Blackfriars Bridge in London. And that was just the beginning. You remember Michael Sindona being poisoned in prison, and a lot of the other guys that came out of the woodwork. Remember talking to Leo Zagami about these guys, and he's been on my show talking about the same stuff. And that was my introduction to the Vatican and Father Marcinkus, his connections to the mob and how they scam everybody. So Marcinkus was indicted by the Italian government. They paid him off. The mob or the bank, that was for, he was also being under suspicion of murder. The number of murders that were going on at that time, judges, everything going on. Basically, anybody that knew anything that was going to talk was getting whacked. Now, what happens is Marcinkus, Vatican pays off the Italian government about $250 million, and he's flown out of Rome, and he spent the rest of his life in a diocese in Phoenix, somewhere outside of Phoenix, playing golf and living the high life, never being charged with anything. And right before his death, maybe I think it was about 7-8 years ago, or maybe a little more, the Italians were again going to open up the Calvi case and maybe indict him of murder. So that was my connection. And when I started seeing all that, I talked about the terrorism, remember I talked about all the things I learned after almost getting blown up there. When you start looking at the mob connection there, it's right there for you. You don't go too deep. You just know it's there. You hear it. You see it. You see the connections. But as far as going too deep, you probably wouldn't be here talking about it right now. So that was my introduction there to the Vatican's role in the mob. Then I basically ended up coming back to America and went to New York. Now listen to this. This is an interesting story. There, I came back after a year and didn't have much money, so the only thing I thought I could do to get some money was to become a waiter in an Italian restaurant. So I worked in Little Italy, and it paid pretty well. And I wanted to get away from journalism, do something completely different. And so from there, I worked in this East Side restaurant, and I worked these night places up until about 2 in the morning, and they turned out to be, I know it was a lot of mob guys coming in partying, and boy, they tipped well. Well, this one guy, Sicilian guy, starts talking to me, and he says, "Oh, wow, you speak Italian, you're from Italy." And we started talking about stories and having a good time. And he says, "Hey, do you want to make more money than just waiting on tables?" I said, "Okay, what?" And now I'm thinking, oh, God, how deep am I going to get in? And he says, "Listen, I own 10 medallions. You know those horses in Central Park, the handsome cab drivers?" He said, "Do you know how to ride a horse?" I said, "Sure." "Cart?" "Yeah." He said, "I own 10 of those. Be at my stables by Times Square tomorrow." Not Times Square, by the train station tomorrow. I said, "Stables in New York?" "Yep. In a 4-story building, you've got stables, and the horses are there in the carriages." And so he taught me how to do that. I'm one of his drivers. And you make very good money. Now, each one of those medallions is worth about $100,000 back then in the 80s. And he was I couldn't say it was a mob guy, but it seemed that to be most of the mob owned all those medallions. So anyway, that's about as close as I ever got to that. Made some good money, stayed about a year, and then came to California to pursue getting a law degree. So the Mafia is always alive and well. Now, here's the point. Along the way, we all get fascinated by this and realize that when you see these stories done, that it's only the tip of the iceberg. Now, I interviewed a guy named Tony Gambino. I just said who he was, grandson of Lucky Luciano. And I wanted to see what he had to say. And he's going to tell you a little bit about what life was like, was on the street. He said this: when you grow up in the family like I did, you learn right off the bat that protection comes from everywhere, including the CIA, FBI, and the blessings from the Vatican, who are at the top of the ladder when it comes to benefiting from Mafia street crime. Said Gambino. He said this to me, and I'm going to play some of the tapes here. He became a made man at the age of 5. Age of 5, a Mafia term used for their top secret captains. I hope I got that right. The age of 5, okay. He was right up there. Gambino name. He says this: the Vatican officials, federal judges, top politicians all used to get regular payoffs from the Gambino family. And, in fact, the Vatican and U.S. government make more money off the illegal drug trade than we did. It's coming from a crime boss. Not a boss, but top guy in the mob. And that is why I'm talking after just getting out of jail for 20 years. So he was in jail for 20 years. I'm talking because people need to know the U.S. government and the Vatican are more dangerous and corrupt than the Mafia ever was. Maybe that's what Gotti was talking about. For example, I know for a fact, he said, that the Cardinal in Palermo runs the Sicilian mob, and former Cardinal Spellman of New York was considered the Vatican's American godfather, since he pulled the strings and had his hands deep into organized crime. Interesting. So let's look. Let me see how much time I got in this half hour. Well, I only got about 4 minutes. It's 3 minutes. So why don't we hold off and start in the second half hour with most of Tony Gambino on my show with Eric Phelps. This was back on September 26, 2007. And here's something he said. Now, anybody that will hear this that's involved in the government or the Vatican is going to say, are you going to believe an ex-con like Gambino? But use your common sense. They all work together. Don't start relying on just the evidence they give you, because you're not going to find this is stuff that it takes that common sense to figure it out, because you're not going to be able to prove all this stuff. They cover it up too well. But who benefits from all this? Look at who's benefiting, and you'll know that they all work together. Now, he said this: I know for a fact Bush was in office at the time, the Pope, and other top Vatican and U.S. government leaders had prior knowledge to help organize 9/11. They did it for an obvious reason, one being instigating the war in Iraq, but they also did it to get their hands on all the gold that was hidden below in the Twin Towers. My grandfather's construction company built the Twin Towers, and after it was completed, I know they went in and put in big underground vaults to house an enormous amount of gold, which is now in Bush's and the Vatican hands in order to fund that stupid war. Now, interesting. He said a lot more. So we're going to listen to that show in about a minute and a half. Interesting stuff. He talks about a number of different things, and I'm sure you're going to find it interesting. And like I said, everybody that I talked to after I did this interview, and you can find it on the internet, people are fascinated by it. Every time, basically, you're going to have to realize that any of these people are just going to deny anything that comes out of the mouth of Gambino, because he's a 20-year ex-con. And so you have to, in a sense, my thinking is also, think about it this way: why would he have anything to hide right now? Why? He's out. He spent his time. He was told, I remember, he was telling me this, and we'll probably hear it on the interview, he could not associate with any of his former friends, or he was going back in jail. So I think I asked him on the show, why would you come out and say these things? And I think he gives the answer. So that'll keep you coming back in the next half hour. And remember this, those two things I mentioned, it's not, go to that show if you want to watch, in fact, some good acting too. Anthony Quinn and Aman Asante were great in that movie. But there's a lot of stuff there that shows you, man, how crime really does pay in America. And, you just have to make a decision. whether you want to do that or not. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's Pacific Time on First Amendment, or 11 a.m. Pacific Time. Now, we're going back to, we're talking about America's fascination with the Mafia, and going back to an interview I did with Tony Gambino of the infamous Gambino crime family. And let me preface it by saying we're going to play some of this. Eric Phelps comes on and asks questions. I invited him on the show, September 26, 2007. And let me preface, the main reason I did this wasn't to get, write a Mafia book, any of that thing like that. It was to show people that the information that I was giving you regarding the Vatican, this was just more evidence that it is a criminal organization. That was my main concern. And that's why I interviewed Tony Gambino. So let's go to that interview I did. I have to wait here a second as everything froze up here. So we're going to have to wait to the computer. There we go. It's all cleared up. Let's go to that interview with Tony Gambino of the infamous Gambino crime family.
Speak up, I can't hear you.
Yeah, is that Tony Gambino?
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, listen, let me just introduce you, Tony. My name's Greg Szymanski from the Investigative Journal. Eric Phelps is with us, and I'm sure you know Eric, but my listeners would want to know a little bit about you. You're the grandson of Lucky Luciano, and Lucky Luciano would bring the Mafia into the modern age, putting the group into what is called organized crime. Out of the ruins of the Mazzeria and the Maranzano gangs would emerge the five families in New York. One of the most powerful would become known as the Gambino family. Tony, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Tell us a little bit about, let's start out with John F. Kennedy.
Can you speak up a little bit? I can't hear you.
Yeah, let's start out with the John F. Kennedy assassination and what you know about it. And Eric, feel free to ask some questions.
Tony, tell us about, where he was born, how he was brought up, and his relationship to his grandfather first.
Go ahead, Tony.
I was born in Palermo, Sicily in 1943. My mother, I don't know who she was because she was married to another gentleman, but my grandfather ordered one of his daughters to have an affair with Carlos Thomas Gambino to bring him into the crime family and let him run the five crime families in New York.
Right.
And at the age of 5, I became a made man by being branded by my grandfather's diamond ring in my left arm, in the middle of my arm, above my elbow, and right below the muscle.
Right.
And I strictly worked underneath him, and until I went to jail, and then he passed away.
Now, when did you come to the States?
What were the guns that you carried, Tony, and who did they belong to? Huh? What were the guns that you carried? When I was 13 years old, he gave me 2 Pre-38 German Lugers, and he told me I'd never leave the house without them, and they're my uniform. Huh. And what was one of them? And one would belong to the General Rommel of the German Army, the Desert Fox, which was a very collector's piece, and it was worth a lot of money.
Wow.
And it had Rommel's name engraved on it, and it was all done with, it was nickel plated, and it had silver and gold on it.
When did you finally come to the States?
When I finally what?
Come to the United States.
Oh, I came to the United States in 1949 for the first time.
Tell us how you grew up on the streets and how your life progressed, and then we'll get into some of the specifics about Kennedy and also Marilyn Monroe and others, things you know about. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hang on. Could you hang on 1 second?
Okay. Eric, feel free to talk. He's having a hard time hearing me, and he's up all the way. We have him potted up all the way, so feel free to...
all right, go ahead. I'm on.
Okay. Tell us how you grew up on the streets, and then we'll get into some specifics about cases you know about. Go ahead.
You want me to tell you about my grandfather?
Yeah, and just basically tell us how you grew up and what you understood about the Mafia as you grew up in it. Go ahead.
Well, he made, at the age of 19, get rid of who? Well, go ahead. I only got $10, so.
You're talking to Tony Gambino. Go ahead, Tony.
At the age of 15 years old, I became a member of my grandfather's made me head of all the Godfathers.
Right.
And I was what they call a meeting organizer. And when a head of a family had a disagreement with the other family member of a different family, say like if Carlos Thomas Gambino had problems with Dominic DeLuca or Joey Genovese, I had to turn around and bring them to a meeting. And I had to get them to either agree, or if they didn't agree, then other steps had to be taken, and somebody had to go.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Eric, do you have any questions? Go ahead.
Yes, tell us more about Lucky Luciano and his influence in Hollywood, Tony.
Oh, well, what he did was, if you've seen Godfather 1, and you've seen that prize horse's head being cut off and put in that producer's bed,
Right.
well, stuff like that went on with a lot of the movie stars that he had took him under his wing, and he gave half them people in Hollywood, he had to give them an offer they couldn't refuse, and that in the first Godfather, when that horse's head was put in that producer's bed, that was for Frank Sinatra to get his first leading part in motion pictures. Now, he took Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Clint Eastwood, Burt Reynolds, Esther Williams, Marilyn Monroe, Rita Hayworth, Humphrey Bogart, and a lot others. And Tony Bennett, and Perry Como, and even Johnny Weissmuller.
Wow, Tarzan, huh?
And he made them all movie stars, and he was getting a percentage off of them a month.
So Lucky was getting a percentage off all these stars that he put into Hollywood.
After he helped them to become stars, because Frank Sinatra was only a barroom singer. That's all he was. In Bohoken, New Jersey, he started off singing in bars. And then he took them out of the bars, he put them with the big bands. And then from the big bands, he went to my grandfather, and he said that he would like to become a movie star, and he would like to get him. He couldn't act for nothing. And they actually had to teach him how to act. After he got the leading part in that one motion picture that he had, and the horse's head got cut off for that.
So that was basically a true story that actually happened about Sinatra, correct?
That's correct. That's how Frank Sinatra got started. And he had to make other deals similar for Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis, Clint Eastwood, Burt Reynolds. You know, he gave them people we call an offer they couldn't refuse.
Well, tell me, Tony, with Lucky Luciano with this kind of power in Hollywood, and why didn't the FBI come after him?
So was Kennedy involved with the movie theaters in Hollywood. Mr. Kennedy himself.
Did the Mafia have a relationship with J. Edgar Hoover?
Yes, they did. J. Edgar Hoover, he was being paid off by the syndicate along with members of the FBI and the CIA. Just like whether people want to believe it or not, in 9/11, President Bush and the CIA and the FBI, they're the ones that knocked down the Empire State. The Twin Towers.
Tell us what you know about that, Tony.
Huh?
Tell us what you know about the connections in 9/11. Go ahead.
Well, all the gold was left in the United States by my grandfather's construction company built the Twin Towers.
Right.
Okay? And then they went back and did some underground work under the Twin Towers where the gold in the United States and in other countries was put under the Twin Towers in a concrete abutment.
Right.
At one time, you used to be able to go underneath the subway and get out of the subway and come up underneath the Twin Towers. But that was eliminated. And all the gold that was left in this country was placed under the Twin Towers. And then the only way you can get that gold out from underneath there was to take the Twin Towers down. And if you look at the gold coin commercial, after President Bush got his hand on that gold, this is what Rosemary O'Donnell was trying to bring into the light, and they took her off the television. See? Because this is what she knew about the gold underneath the Twin Towers. And if you look at that television commercial, you'll see where it says gold coins made from the gold that was found underneath the Twin Towers. And that's the only reason why the Twin Towers taken down, so he could get his hands on that gold. And as soon as he got his hands on that gold, he goes into Iraq. Ben Laden had nothing to do. In 1935, an Army Air Force, an Army airplane bomber hit the Empire State Building, which was a heavier and bigger plane. And it didn't knock the Empire State Building down. All high-rise buildings are made to be struck by airplanes.
So you have inside information that these guys, Bush included, tell us more how they knew about 9/11 prior to it happening and also organized it.
Yeah, let's put it to you this way. Yeah. If you were a terrorist pilot, okay, and you made it to Washington, D.C., and you were supposed to hit the White House, why would you fly a plane into the Pentagon if you're supposed to hit the White House?
Right.
Okay? Then up in Somerset, they said that plane turned around and it was supposed to, that's the one that was supposed to hit the White House.
Right.
If you look at the records of that plane was scattered in a 100-mile radius. If a plane is going to crash, it's going to stay at the crash site. It's not going to be blown up and spread out in a 100-mile radius. That plane was shot down by a fighter jet missile. They shot that plane down.
Right. What do you know about the connections between our government, the mob, the Vatican, all of their complicity in 9/11? Do you think they all work together to bring this about?
You better believe they do. And the Vatican is the headquarters. The Vatican is the headquarters for that.
And how do you know that?
Do the Mafia Dons all know that?
Huh?
Do the Mafia Dons all know that?
Yes, they do. It was the Pope who got my grandfather to hang Mussolini upside down in the square and had people rock him. And if a person didn't throw the rock, my grandfather had his men there to order them to shoot anybody who he handed a rock to didn't throw the rock.
Now, I think anybody who doesn't think the Vatican is involved with the mob and also with our government intelligence agencies ought to listen again to what Tony said.
Well, the Vatican wasn't corrupt. Do you think they would let these priests rape these boys and get away with it?
Yeah.
Tell me, does the Archbishop of Palermo control the Mafia families there?
Yes, they do.
So therefore, the Vatican's in control of the heroin drug trade.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah, and you know what? Let's talk a little bit, Eric. You have done so much research on the Kennedy assassination. Why don't you ask Tony some questions that come to mind about his knowledge of how that really happened.
Okay. Were you in Dallas that day, Tony, when that happened?
I was in Dallas that day.
Mm-hmm. And where do you feel the final fatal headshot came from?
The headshot that killed Kennedy came from a hitman who was placed in the storm drain.
I read that Johnny Roselli was that hitman. Does that ring a bell to you?
That is correct.
The same guy
and
who did the shooting in the
if
same...
you would look the films of that over, you'll see that all his bodyguards stayed away from that car because they knew it was going down. Once the first shot was fired, what are they supposed to do? They were supposed to make a body wall to protect the president. Not one person went near that coach. And the guy had the chance to kill him sooner. And if you would have watched that film, you'll see the guy come out of the storm drain, walk across a green field over there, and got in the car. The guy drove him away.
Outside of Roselli, who else was involved in that hit team? And what were you doing in Dallas then?
Huh?
Who else was involved in that hit team, to the best of your knowledge?
Who was involved?
Yeah.
Frank Sinatra was involved.
You mean Frank Sturgis?
Huh?
Frank Sturgis, you mean?
That's right. And Frank Sinatra was involved too because he's the one that caused that. Because he introduced Marilyn Monroe to the two Kennedy brothers, John and Robert.
Mm-hmm.
And Marilyn Monroe got pregnant by the Kennedys. And she was going to call Jacqueline Kennedy and Robert Kennedy's wife to let them know that she had an affair with their husbands, and neither one of them two got her pregnant. And the Kennedys are the ones who killed Marilyn Monroe. And Frank Sinatra introduced Marilyn Monroe to Jack Kennedy at the White House.
Mm-hmm.
And then he turned around. Are you there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. And then after that happened, my grandfather, you remember when Frank Sinatra's son got kidnapped?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, my grandfather had him kidnapped, and he gave the sands to Frank Sinatra in Vegas because at one time he was the biggest star in Vegas. But then after this happened, Wayne Newton came into the picture, and Wayne Newton became a bigger star in Vegas than Frank Sinatra. And he took the sands back off of Frank Sinatra and made Frank Sinatra pay all that ransom money for his son because of the death of Marilyn Monroe. Because he was still making a lot of money by Frank Sinatra being a movie star and singing and records.
Do you know who they hired to kill Marilyn Monroe? Was that something you were privy to?
They gave Marilyn Monroe them drugs.
Mm-hmm.
They did it themselves. Just like Edward Kennedy.
Okay.
Just like Edward Kennedy. He took that girl up on Cape Cod, right, and up in the Hyannis. And for some ungodly reason, he put a 22 round through that girl's head. And that's what killed that girl, was the bullet that he put in that girl's head.
So Ed Kennedy shot her. I've heard that before from the coroner, yeah. That's interesting.
Right. And that's where the blood came on her dress and stuff. It came from the head. After that 22 round went through her back of her neck and into her brain. That's what killed her. And then Edward Kennedy stepped out of that car. He jacked up the gas pedal, and he kicked that gearing car with a stick. And let that car go over the cliff with that girl in it. Okay, so
I took a break there in 2007. I only have about 3 minutes, and we got about halfway, in fact, 19 minutes and 20 seconds into what turned out to be about a 45-minute interview with Tony Gambino. And so what I think I'll do, instead of playing a couple more minutes, I'll just come back and play the second half tomorrow on the Investigative Journal on Thursday. That will be January 28th. And you can listen to some of the things that Tony talked about. And in the second half hour, he gets a little bit more into why he's talking now, how he just got out of jail, and might be interesting to see where he is today. I think I'll check that out. But anyway, that was Eric Phelps coming on my show to ask questions of Tony. And I think between the two of us, we got a lot of information out there. And I know this show went out to a lot of different people and still is played in a number of different places. So if you get a chance, you can see it under Tony Gambino says, Vatican runs the mob. Well, you hear it from the horse's mouth, don't you? And I guess you'd just say, listen, who's benefiting from all this corruption, all these wars, and what's going on today? And I guess, you know who it is. You know who's benefiting. The United States government, probably the biggest landowner in our country, even though the Constitution forbids most of it. And the second biggest probably is the Vatican. So they've done quite well lying to us all, haven't they? And it's not going to end, unfortunately. So come back tomorrow, listen to what I had to say about Tony Gambino, ask Tony more questions. And, of course, you can catch my show. I'll just remind you again, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's Pacific time on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Tell your friends about it. And also it's played at 11 a.m. And there's a lot of good shows going back years and years and years. So don't miss some of those. And also, what I wanted to mention was Friday I will be having Bert Krantz from the Alamo Ministry on to talk more about that, the travesty of justice that took place on a Christian ministry who basically was telling the people the truth about the exact Vatican we're talking about today. And for that reason, they have been targeted for over 40 years, and Tony Olamo, that is, put in jail for 175 years. So we'll catch up on that story on Friday. In the meantime, what can I tell you? We're just about out of time, and I only got about 20 seconds here. But one of the interesting things about go to that movie Gotti with Anthony Quinn and Aman Asante, and also the Sammy Gravano documentary where Sammy talks, the underboss who ratted on Gotti. Interesting stuff. But anyway, we'll be back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal. Good night.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.